Lots of people making big, big bucks. You and me, babe, I see we're out of love. Well, I heard a voice from a high above. It don't cost a thing just to be in love. We don't have anything but love.
Welcome to GenderVision. Today we have two guests in the studio, Helen Boyd and Betty Crow.
You know, I took responsibility for being with someone who is trans in the same way that she acknowledged that she was in a relationship with someone who wasn't trans.
When I get frustrated because things aren't moving fast, I always remind myself that glaciers win in the end.
We'd been walking hand in hand all day, and we got back to our neighborhood. Betty very nervously dropped my hand, and I thought, well, you're going to have to get used to being a woman in a relationship with a woman as much as I am. I mean,
It seems like to me, and this is just my opinion, that some trans people project the problems they had in their own lives with their own partners, and then make giant global statements about partners based on the fact that they had a problem, or that their marriage fell apart, or that they aren't dating, or whatever it is. And I'm sympathetic to the fact that they had a hard time. But I have no sympathy for when, well, frankly, anyone projects their own problems onto other people. It's not a method of dealing, it's not rational, and it sets us back as a community in lots of ways, because our community isn't just trans people. If it is, I want out, because I can't think of a more boring group of people to spend eternity with. I want other types of people to show up. I want partners and loved ones and friends and families and coworkers.
you don't want to exist in a void.
No, I want the whole thing that is life. I don't want life to be about just being transgendered. How boring.
So that it becomes like an exclusive club. And you forget everyone that you're interrelated to, which is, I mean, one of the things that defines a community is that the community is interrelated to one another, and that people interact in the community, they support one another, they're there for one another in the community.
And communities are healthy when they're diverse.
Yes.
When there are lots of different things going on in a community.
And we so know that from biology, from sociology.
You know, nature loves diversity.
Well, it's also,
I think people do too, except when it scares us.
It's also practical at some level to me, is that trans people, I mean, one of the reasons that we started doing what we did was that I wanted to be able to provide, you know, a visible example of a relationship where one of the people was trans and one of them wasn't. And I say to partners all the time, you know, I still am not sure that I get transness, but that doesn't mean that I can't get that it's very real, you know, that Betty's not crazy, and that I can't say those things.
Not about this.
Well, and other things perhaps. But there's a lot of other stuff that comes up where we really talk about the fact that transness does have to be seen as something that's holistic, and the only way of doing that is making partners and family. I mean, there's a reason PFLAG worked, right? Is that all of those families and friends and allies of gay and lesbian people are people who are going to go out and vote for gay and lesbian friendly legislation. And if the trans community doesn't nurture that kind of idea, community, you know, however you want to think of it, families and communities, then you're losing potential allies. And there's, I mean, even in my own research, I find that a lot of partners do have genders. And there's certainly a lot of tomboys, female partners of MTFs out there who really have conflicts with their own gender when this stuff comes up. And the reality is there's no support. I mean, I like to say that the trans people may be going through these very sort of hacked out paths in a very deep forest. But at least there are kind of a couple of paths. I feel like a lot of the time partners are standing at the very edge of the wood, machete in hand. You know, there's no path. There's nothing much there yet. And it's really just the beginning of seeing sort of partners kind of step up and say, well, you know, we have to create ways of doing this. We don't know how to do it yet. And therapists often aren't prepared for us. No. I mean, there's that whole tradition of people transitioning being told by their therapist that they have to get divorced, you know. There's years and years of there's no way to do this end of story.
Absolute requirement before
Right.
before surgery, you know,
Right.
that you had to do that.
And yet people are pulling it off left and right, and people who are conservative or liberal, it has nothing to do with that. It seems to be the basis on how the trans person deals with their loved one and how the loved one deals with, you know, I mean, it's a lot of different circumstances, but it's certainly possible.
It's like
But yelling at partners that they're transphobic if they
No.
say anything negative
Right.
is not going to help that situation,
Right.
in my opinion.
I
I know
agree.
it certainly turned me off to trying,
Well,
in terms of being involved
it's
in
ridiculous
community
because
activism.
basically you're telling the partner or the family member or the loved one, you have no stake in my life.
Yeah.
So that, which is just another way of saying, you know, you do not matter to me.
Of course.
I don't care how you think or how you feel, or,
Yeah.
right.
And you know, if you're going to say that, then be honest that that's what you're saying, because that means that later on you can't feel bad that that person doesn't have any stake in your life.
That's true. That's
You
true.
can't feel bad. You'll get no sympathy from me because you went, no, you have no stake in my life. Fine, you said that.
Yeah.
Right.
So 3 years later, when you're crying and this person that loved you and was told bye-bye,
Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the things that I hear a lot from partners, and this is partners who weren't necessarily intending to be in a relationship with a trans person, and people who
Sure.
were and are and knew full well what they were getting into, that one of the things that comes up over and over again is that the transness is not an excuse for bad behavior.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't excuse, you know, spending all the family money, you know, making decisions by yourself or not being a good partner
Well, you
because of
told
other
me things
things.
about people emptying
Emptying
401k.
401k plans and college savings plans for the kids in order to transition and not really even talking to their wives about
And
it.
just doing it.
Just doing it. And you know, you hear these women afterwards and they're getting divorced and they have no resource. There is no family resources to split up because the trans person has spent it all on transition. So they're ending up divorced without a partner, raising kids. I mean, it's the same stories you hear, you know, in other stories of divorce,
Sure.
unfortunately, and it's no different. I mean, to me, it's like a last throw at male privilege. Right before the person transitions, they go, it's all my money, you know, and
Oh.
this woman who's been raising my children doesn't get any because I need it for transition.
Do you see that
it's
on
horrifying.
the other side on
FTM.
FTMs?
The complaints I hear from partners of FTMs are more like that some FTMs sometimes go through a process of distancing themselves from their femaleness, and so they'll go through a period maybe of telling misogynist jokes or being uber macho or domineering and in ways that they think guys are supposed to be. Like
Yeah.
I hear that a lot, and for especially the lesbian partners of FTMs, it's like, who are you and what are you doing in my house, you know? So one of the funny
that's
things.
another tricky shift, particularly if you're going from a lesbian couple and now you're being
Where
read
there's
as a straight
equality.
couple.
right?
Oh.
It's
That's
the corollary
huge.
that most MTF couples go
Yeah.
through, where they lose their sort of heterosexual
Yes.
privilege and gain kind of like queer privilege, whatever that would
And
be.
that's
If
just
they
the
can.
reverse.
But it's
if
just
they
the
manage.
reverse. And to hear a lesbian partner say, I'm straight, I don't want to be straight.
Yeah.
I don't want people
I
to
worked
think I'm
so
straight."
hard on being a lesbian.
And that's been my community
and
forever
that's been my community.
and ever.
And now what?
Especially the femmes, I mean, because
Yeah.
they're read often
Sure.
as straight anyway when
Oh,
they're
yeah.
by themselves,
Right.
and having a female partner was kind of what made them visibly lesbian, and then when they lose that and their partner's FTM, it's like, well, nobody ever sees me as a lesbian at all anymore.
Well, that takes us back to that whole idea of a sort of journey through this forest that you were talking about.
Machete in
Can
hand.
you share a little bit about your own journey and what you discovered about your gender, how that was, and how the both of you and how you processed that?
Where do I start there? I was going to say, I read 300 pages about this, so it's, there's a lot. A lot of it was that there's a concept in sociology, I think it's in sociology, they call relational identity.
Yes.
And the concept that, you know, your gender is going to be affected by someone else's gender. And I certainly grew up with social constructionist, feminist views
Yeah.
of gender. And when Betty first started dressing in the very beginning, I immediately felt that sort of, you know, that straight girl, she's not going to be prettier than me. You know, that it kicked in right away. And I tried right away to like do the dresses, and we would sort of, it was like we were both doing drag in the
Yeah.
early days. I was putting on dresses and
It's a great
platform
way to-
heels.
That
and
horrible
makeup
trip
and-
to Midtown that you wore heels and we had to buy new shoes.
to buy new shoes. I
It
can't wear
was so
heels. I
bad.
have one flat
Yeah.
foot. It's torture. But I tried. You know, I was trying to be this feminine person, and then for a while after that, I kind of just felt like a failure. And being reminded, it was back in middle school, back in junior high, as us older people call it, where it was that sense of, there were all the pretty girls who were, had hit puberty and seemed to like gracefully become women, and then there were the rest of us. And for me, it was, I was a tomboy, and so those girls were mean to me. They were, everyone in junior high school is mean, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of famous, I guess, at this point.
Well, they're
nobody
all
would go
wired
back.
on hormones.
Right.
And
They don't know where to go.
insecure,
They've got a
and-
lot of attractions and a lot of issues going on in
And
terms of
but
who
I think
they
it's
are.
too when
Yeah.
like girls form alliances with
Oh,
each
yeah.
other and they're always kicking the other girl out, and there's a lot of that awful cliquishness that so many people have nightmares, ongoing
Yeah.
problems with. But that's what it was like. I felt like I was living with one of those girls. Betty, being femme and very feminine, just reminded me of all those people. So it really was that experience. I mean, I called it living with the enemy for a while. It was this feeling that I was living with someone who was intentionally making me feel bad about my own femininity. And then I realized that her femininity had nothing whatsoever to do with mine. And it was really a result of meeting queer femmes that I got that idea. All of a sudden, when I met queer femmes, these sort of uber feminine presenting women, and I could flirt with them, or they could flirt with me, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is perfectly safe. They like having girls like me around. They value girls like me, or they value women like me, where heterosexual feminine girls don't. I'm just weird in competition. I'm the girl that their boyfriend's talking to, So there was always that threatening, because I was always friends with the guys, and I knew what they thought about their girlfriends. So there was that kind of threatening
I can
thing.
identify with that.
And
too,
it's kind of a weird position to be in, but it was definitely true for a lot of my life. And it was only when I met femmes who were queer and who like women, who are gender neutral or soft butch or however you want to articulate it, that I went, oh, okay. This doesn't have to reflect, Betty's gender doesn't have to be a kind of throwdown to me feeling competitive.
It's not a competition.
It's not a competition. And if I'm more masculine, it certainly doesn't make me the boy one in the relationship. It's just my gender. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of hers, or I don't have to femme up to be as femme as her. Like, I can just have my own gender, which I think, again, is the thing that we don't necessarily acknowledge enough in the trans community. The partners do have their own genders, and I think a lot of us don't end up in relationship with trans people accidentally. I mean, I think we're drawn a lot of the time to people who have issues with their own gender. Certainly a lot of us who knew what we were getting into. Not the people necessarily who were married 20 years, but the people who, I certainly knew I was with someone who cross-dressed occasionally. Can I use that term?
Just once in a
Presented
blue moon.
as female, once in a blue moon. But I knew that I was getting into a relationship with someone who was dealing with gender.
That's, I think, a really important issue, because I know for myself, and it wasn't until I realized that I was in the middle of studying very intensely and looking at the gender movement as this amazing social movement that was happening, and looking back on all the historical stuff that had happened, that I started to ask myself, now, why am I so interested in doing this research? I hadn't met my partner. I was not partnered with a trans person at all, but yet I was living my life in the library, reading everything that I could possibly find, everything that had been published, et cetera.
Sure.
And it really came to me in terms of my own gender that I'd always had a real discomfort in being a girl, that I didn't quite fit in, that I hung out with a lot of the guys. I was competitive. I was a drag racer with a lot of the guys. In fact, I held the title in Albuquerque, and it just, there was a part of me that I always felt, and it was a very important part of me, that was male, but it was kind of like a femme male that was deep inside. And I used to even sign my poetry and my stories and my writing with this pen name, Joshua Van Gogh. And it was like this very most protected, innermost part of myself. And there was a point in my life when I was in my early 20s, where I started thinking, well, if this is the most important aspect of my identity that I hold the dearest, that does all the things that I love, does that mean that I should have sex change surgery. And in my early 20s, I knew about Christine Jorgensen. I didn't know anyone in the community at all. Most people weren't out in the community. And I just went through a long period of asking my male friends, because I had primarily male friends, because I'd been thrown out of the girl pile because I was too wild for the girl pile. And all the moms kicked me out because they thought I was ruining their daughters' chances for being married. Yes, and yes, I was. But
Good for you.
proudly,
Good for you.
proudly. And I didn't know what to do with that. I can remember asking my male friends, well, don't you think I really look more male than female? And they're like, Corinne, you're probably the most feminine woman that we've ever seen. But to me, I didn't mirror that back. And so that was a real disconnect for me, a real hard disconnect. Yeah. And when I met my partner, Nancy, I felt that there was a meeting and a big enough space where I could be all the gender things that I really felt, and it was a powerful connection between us and gender.
You could be the composite of, you could be the sum of all your parts as opposed to just some of your parts.
Isn't that an important thing to think about?
You know what, I don't think trans people have a monopoly on, trying to put all the pieces together in the right way.
Yeah.
No. Well, I think all of us repress our genders. I know whenever I would tell people that, I've always felt masculine, or even that at certain times that I looked masculine. I got clocked as a guy when I was 19, on more than one occasion, really? Accidentally. Yeah. And whenever I told people that, they would automatically say, "Oh no, Helen, you're so feminine."
And
it
was
was
like, what people would always say to me to kind of confirm that.
Yeah,
it was always like, "Don't worry."
I don't want you to tell me that I don't have that masculinity, because it's important to me.
And I don't want to have that disappeared, because that's something that you don't even share with a lot of people,
right.
And it's really a tough one.
And then it's like, well, then I'm just, weird? I mean, that I don't necessarily get along with feminine women very easily, and I've always felt more distrustful of feminine women than I have of, other tomboys. It's never a problem.
Yeah.
I've always had an easy time getting along with women who aren't, stereotypical.
Yeah.
So we've been working on Betty,
You're doing a good job.
My ultimate goal. She's going to be some sort of tomboy femme at the end of the day.
And yet you mentioned you were coming out in kind of an adolescence, so you were feeling what it is to be your femme self and be able to let that out. So that, and you said, I think you had 2 ages you mentioned
right.
yesterday.
It's like being 38 and 14 at the same time, which is really bizarre, because you're like, you have this 38 mature sense of self looking at the exact same self behaving like a 14-year-old. And it's sometimes the disconnect. Sometimes I will lay there and think, this is so ridiculous. What in God's name are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't want to do this again.
Yeah.
It was no fun the first time.
Going through adolescence again.
Oh, but yeah. I mean, the nice thing about it, in context, is her willingness to kind of play the slightly older person who goes, yeah, you really can't wear that.
Oh, there you go.
You look bad.
I never tell you look bad. I just suggest you maybe wear something else.
After saying you look bad, and then you look at my crestfallen face, and then you go, oh, maybe you should wear something else. So you do both.
You've put some nutty outfits together.
Oh, of course I've put some nutty outfits together.
It's the trendiness, and that is always something that Betty and I laugh about, is that I'm not a particularly trendy person, and I never have been. Yeah. And because it's too expensive to keep up. I've always been a vintage clothes store kind of person.
Oh, I love that.
And, or classic, very basics kind of stuff. And Betty's always coming home with these things, these shirts and things that I just go, where did you find that? I don't even know where you buy things like that, that are very trendy. And so that's always kind of entertaining. Slowly,
is that what
of course.
We're calling it today?
Slowly, trendy, silly, Britney Spears, whatever you want to call it. But, I've been picked on for that, because I do pick on femininity at some level. And a part of me is, well, that's, I think femininity is picked on sometimes for good reason. I'm not really the kind of person who's going to say that femininity is sort of the it's never spoken to me at all. And I think some of the reaction that I've had to that has been to kind of be able to poke fun at it a little bit, because
try
it
to
makes it
see
a little
it,
less
yeah.
painful to feel like I'm not living up to that standard that society has said I'm supposed to be. But I certainly don't intend to insult feminine
I know.
people as a result. And I've always loved feminine men, of course. That has nothing whatsoever to do with
Oh,
it.
that was my favorite criticism of you.
Oh, yeah, that I don't, yeah.
The new book was their take on the new book was that
Even Helen Boyd
hates feminine men.
And I thought, I'm the biggest fan of feminine men in the
said
world.
that?
I think it was an Amazon.com review. And I laughed because I thought, you must have gotten hold of a Bizarro World manuscript.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
which book they read.
Because I can't see how you get that out of there. But,
Well, it
you know,
depends.
it's
If the person was defining a trans woman as a form of a feminine man, which I don't do, then I
Right.
think that's the that's the equation they were making. Is that, and it was like, no, I loved having a feminine man for a partner. It's having a woman for a partner that's a problem. That's complicated for me.
Can you talk about that a little bit, and how you navigate and negotiate? Because one of the strengths of the two of you that's phenomenal is your ability to really stay there and work on things together, and you really seem on the same wavelength there in terms of really working to understand, whereas a lot of people would really give up on issues, but you seem to get to, you mentioned before, to a plateau,
Right.
stay there, and then you go on to another plateau. How do you do that?
I think it's really just a willingness to be able to go over ground, sometimes over and over again. And Betty has certainly heard me complain about things at numerous times, in repeated ways, and just going, oh, here she goes, she's going on that rant, and allowing me to kind of have my say. And you've done the same thing about other stuff. But it's really that commitment to the relationship of actually finding the other person's process really interesting. I mean, and I've been, when I try to explain to people that watching Betty's transformation has been fascinating, at least as fascinating to watch as it has been difficult for me to process. And that's in a lot of ways what makes it dealable for me, is that it's interesting. And because I guess my basic nature with you is sympathetic or empathetic or something like that. Occasionally critical and cranky.
Yes. But I think the bottom line is we're both willing to compromise immediate gratification for long-term stability, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Is to go,
It does.
right, okay, no, I would love to do this right now, but if I do this right now, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Right.
Because I will have advanced off of the same page.
You mentioned something yesterday during the talk. You said because you wanted to grow old together.
Right.
And you really tugged at the audience's heartstrings. I think everyone there.
Well, I've been asked many times what my goal is.
Yeah.
And I know what they're asking. They're asking, what's your goal with the transition or
Like when you say, are
transgenderness?
you going to have
What are you gonna-
surgery?
right,
That
right.
ultimate question.
And I always say my goal is to get married.
Yeah.
To stay married. I
Already
am married.
Yeah.
Sorry. I always say my goal is to stay married. And then they look at me and they go, no. And I go, no, really, that is the goal. I could transition tomorrow completely and fully and be done with it, and everybody would be happy with all the things that I did, and I would have met everybody's requirements and blah, 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 blah. But I'd be alone. I'm pretty much sure that if I decided just tomorrow to do everything, that Helen would go, right, that's way too fast. I can't deal with this.
And you didn't.
We can't do
with
this.
me.
Right. And so then I'd grow old a woman, and I wouldn't be with her anymore. And the idea is, the goal is to be old walking down the beach together, or wherever, maybe Midtown Manhattan, or the nursing home, or wherever. But to be, I hope it's not the nursing home, to walking together, whatever it is. And whatever I look like, or whatever version of me happens to be, apparent at that point, whatever the process has been, it will still be me there walking down that beach with her.
In Thailand.
In Thailand.
In
Oh my
Thailand.
God. Exactly.
It could be.
It's been an ongoing joke with
Sure.
us. Is
no,
that
and it could be anywhere. Yeah.
no, it could be anywhere. That's the whole idea. Is that
But
we
that's
both
the-
want to be together.
Right.
And a lot of people have said to me over time, that I'm kind of Betty's gatekeeper, in a certain sense, that I'm the one holding her back from doing all this stuff. And a part of me always laughs and says, well, of course you know everything about Betty because she really never talks to anyone about anything. And I love when people sort of project all of what they think about their own transness to her, that she's wanted to do this, that, and the other thing, 10 years ago, and I've been the one standing in the way. And a part of me goes, God, if that were true, the amount of resentment she would have would be huge. Tangible. I mean, people would be very aware of it. And she's not resentful of me because it's never been like that. And it's hard to explain how it has been because I think sometimes it's so out of the universe in terms of transness or even relationships in general that the way that we've worked with each other has been so much about, there are times that she wanted to disappear and not deal with her transness, and I was the one going, no, you need to look at this because you're unhappy. There are times that I've been the one pushing her. And I'm not sure that people necessarily see both sides of it. They only see me playing this gatekeeper role. And I've always said to her, you can go ahead and do whatever you want. If you want to transition in 10 minutes, that's great. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to do it. Sure. I can't promise you that I'm going to be there because I don't know. And if you do it fast, the more likely it is that we're not going to know. I won't have gotten used to all of the rest of the stuff, like being seen as a lesbian couple in public. And it was important for us to keep we wanted to have a romantic and sexual relationship. Yeah. We think that,
That's part of the gig.
That's part of the gig. I have sisters already. I don't need to be married to mine. So, the sense of us as a couple is very much that we wanted to be able to do that. And to some degree, that meant getting used to the fact that people would see us as a queer couple.
Right.
And,
and the other thing about the whole gatekeeper accusation or whatever it is that cracks me up more than anything else is that it presupposes that I have no say in anything. I just sit there, very willing to sit there in my leather suit.
All your agency, everything is stripped away, and then it's almost a sexist way of looking at
very funny, and that's when I go, wow, people. That's one, and in some ways people go, how could you let so much of your life be in a book? Yeah. There's so much of my life that's not in the book.
Oh yeah.
Like 9/10 of who I am is not in the book.
That's
right.
And it just cracks me up.
That should be the next book.
The other 9/10. No, it's all boring.
Yeah.
No, but the idea that
boring.
And I understand on some level because you put a story out there, and that really is all the information they have to go on because it's not like we're friends with everybody, and we can talk. And I very purposefully have tried to stay in the background. Because I think her story and what she's saying is important enough that I don't want to be too forward. I don't want to be too in the mix because I really want people to hear what she's saying. And I want people to understand that what she's saying is real and it's truthful as far as she sees it from her point of view. And that it's valid. And I think, a lot of the times when people say things like gatekeeper, or they call her transphobic, or they call me transphobic, or people make a projection. I laugh on some level. I mean, it's a little frustrating because who wants to get called that? But mostly I laugh because I kind of think, baby, it's working. You got people all riled up.
You got people all riled up, so it is working.
It's working.
That's great.
We both have a little bit of that inclation in general. That
it's our old punk rock selves.
Yeah.
Your old punk rock selves.
There's always
There's
always this urge to kind of
throw a wrench into the works.
Just to be like, up yours, copper.
Oh, yeah. You can learn more about Helen and Betty and the issue of being partnered with a transgender person and also partner advocacy at en/GENDER, and the website is myhusbandbetty.com.
And remember, gendervision.org and gendertalk.com are sources for lots more video and audio programming about these kinds of issues.
And thanks so much for joining us. Remember, when we expand our gender vision, we can see more and we can be more. We'll see you next time.
Oh.